Welcome back to Call of the Father. I gotta say, I'm pretty overwhelmed with the response to the first episode, and I just can't believe how many people have listened to it. And I just thank you for listening. I just feel like this is a calling and a purpose for me, and I feel really blessed if it helps people. And so I just really appreciate you all listening. Um, that first episode, I did it in one take and I edited out like 5 seconds. And I kind of like the way that went. It just felt more real and authentic. So that's what I'd like to do on every episode. Just hopefully no editing. Hopefully I don't make big mistakes that I have to edit out. But here goes, second episode. Let's go. Something that's been on my heart and mind a lot over the last few years, just on this journey of healing and going through the divorce, trying to help my kids. There's things you don't see when you're in a marriage, and especially if you're codependent and you're in a marriage with a narcissist, there's things that you don't see in ways that you are. And boy, this is a hard thing to come to terms with. Something that came up was trying to help my kids, the scapegoat child. If you study narcissism and a narcissistic family dynamic, narcissistic parent, there's pretty much always a scapegoat child. And what happens with a scapegoat child is everything gets blamed on them. Everything's their fault. And I've seen it over and over with my kids. The second there was an issue brewing, and I played into this. I was guilty of playing in for fear of not being in tune with my ex, or it was already hard enough trying to connect. And that's what I wanted more than anything, was to connect with her and to be able to just feel validated in that relationship. And so my daughter suffered. My daughter was she was the scapegoat child, and there's a lot of suffering she went through. I see it now. And when I started to realize my part in it, it was a really hard pill to swallow. There were so many times I would come home from work. It feels like deja vu. I'd come in the house, and the second I walked in the door, all I could hear is screaming and a big blow up. And it was usually my daughter. My daughter Maggie would be just screaming, just melting down. And the second I came in, I remember thinking, well, something's not right. And so I'd say, Maggie, what's the matter? And the second I would say, Maggie, what's the matter? Her mom, there was no hi, how was your day? It was immediately jump my shit and tell me I already dealt with it. Like, the words were the exact same every time. She'd say, she's choosing her own attitude. I already dealt with it. And basically it was like, stay the fuck out of it. And in my mind, there were so many narratives that I bought into, that we had this image of a perfect family, and she was super mom. And I really believed that. I thought she was the most amazing mom on the face of the earth. I bought into it. And so then when she would say that, I would be like, oh, whoa, okay. And like, yeah, she's super mom and I'm just Johnny come lately. Who would I be to question her? So there's an immediate justification to not do what my heart told me was right. My heart told me, I had an intuition as a father to dig in, listen to Maggie and say, hey, what's going on, Mags? And when I didn't listen, when I bought the narrative that I'm Johnny come lately, don't get involved, stay out of it. Later I realized that was pretty cowardly. That was pretty cowardly on my part. And that was growing up with narcissistic emotional abuse and so many things I went through. I built an ego image of myself as this tough guy, and I really believed I was in control. And in the end, I was the alpha. I think she let me believe I was the alpha in some ways. And the last thing in the world I would ever want to think I was in any scenario is a coward. And when I realized how cowardly it was to bow to her and let Maggie take the brunt of everything for fear of having my ex pissed off at me, because that didn't feel good. Basically, that was the choice that I made. I was willing to let my daughter suffer in that and justify it as, well, she's super mom. Who am I to question her? I haven't been here all day to see how she's dealt with it, but she just yelled at me and told me she dealt with it. Okay. And it really, like, it was hard to think about what Maggie went through, always being blamed immediately. There was never any hearing her out, hearing her side of the story. And all kids need to be validated. And as things went on, this was actually after kind of doing this backwards, but early after the divorce, seeing the divorce, I ended up with the kids. I have them 90% of the time on paper. Really, it's more than that. So they don't always go when they're supposed to go to their moms. But there's a lot of just trying to heal. I wanted to help the kids. I was like, man, thank God that I noticed this dynamic and how I had failed my daughter, because there's been healing since then. And I noticed when an issue would brew with her siblings, immediately Maggie would just, as soon as an issue brewed, she'd blow up. And it wasn't, there's no reasoning with her. And I was kind of at my wit's end. I was like, geez, and wanted to help, but it was very frustrating. And one day I just remember thinking, holy crap, she's 12 and she's acting like she's 2 or 3. And I was kind of frustrated to the point of mad about it. And then then I said it again. I'm like, she's acting like she's 2 or 3. And then I said it again to myself. I'm like, she's acting like she's 2 or 3. And the realization hit me. She was stunted emotionally. She's such a smart kid. She's so intuitive. She can break down dynamics of relationships and things. You wouldn't even believe how intuitive she is. She's maybe my smartest child. But when situations brew, you just lose it immediately. And so then it dawned on me, she's jumping straight to the end conclusion. As soon as the issue starts to brew, she already knows how it's all going to end. It's going to be all her fault. And she's already jumping to the end conclusion, how she feels when that happens. And she's just blowing up because she knows in her heart it's not right. It's not fair. And she's right. And I separated it in my mind that day, and I realized, okay, there's like a switch that flips for her. And right now, she's not 12. She's not the 12-year-old Maggie. She's 3 or 4 because she's stunted. That's where she was never, ever validated as a kid. And I did no good to help when I was married to her mom. I didn't help that situation. But the second there was ever a problem, it was always her fault. Even from the other room, without anything really being investigated, you got to help our kids. And I thought about it. What would I do with the 2 or 3-year-old? And a 2 or 3-year-old gets into it with another 2 or 3-year-old, and you see the whole thing go down, and you're thinking like they're so mad and so upset and they're crying and they're like, oh, you hurt my feelings, and you're thinking it's nothing short of ridiculous from an adult point of view, but I wouldn't treat it that way. I would take a 2 or 3 year old and I'd sit him on my lap and be, come here, I know, and I'm really sorry, that doesn't feel good. And you validate their feelings. And then I think as you validate a little child's feelings, that's how they grow. They need that. You validate their feelings, and eventually they start to, what we do for them as parents, they learn to do for themselves. That's how they grow up. And so you validate their feelings. I know, sweetie, that doesn't feel good. Come here. And you just hug them and hold them and comfort them. And eventually, I think with that 2 or 3 year old, they grow and they become 4 or 5, and they start to realize that their person inside and that other person they're having an issue with is a person inside. They must have feelings like I have. I think this is how this happens for a healthy parent-child dynamic, and they start to reason in their own mind and have empathy. That's how they learn empathy. And so I literally started taking Maggie, she's 12 years old, and there was this separation. I thought, I can bring her back together. I can reconcile her stunted 3-year-old self with her 12-year-old self, because she's not ruined. Everybody can heal. And so literally I started, and I even kind of talked to the other kids in private. I said, listen, this has happened a lot, and everything's always Maggie's fault, and it's not fair. And it doesn't mean that there aren't two sides of everything. And so then I started taking Maggie. The second she started to get upset, instead of trying to reason with her, said, come here, Maggie. I literally sat her on my lap and hugged her. And I said, I know you're upset, and I know that didn't feel good. I started treating her like a 3 or 4 year old. The results that I saw after that are unbelievable. Like, one day I usually try to let things play out just a little bit when I hear a conflict brewing and see if they handle it, before I get involved. It's part of growing. We got to learn to handle our own conflicts. But one day I heard her with her younger brother. It's usually her and her younger brother. And I heard a conflict starting, and I kind of gave it a minute, and I was just listening from the other room and wasn't going to get involved yet. And then all of a sudden I hear Maggie come back and say, hey, buddy, you know what? That wasn't very nice the way that I said that, and I'm really sorry. Oh my God, my mind was blown. Like, I could not believe what I was hearing. And this validation, this is the way to heal it. This is the way that kids should be dealt with when they are 2 or 3. But I've seen so much growth in her. And there was a lot. At one point, her mom was even sending me emails. And one thing I was so codependent at one point, and standing up to her mom, just like I said, when we were still married, I would just cower to her. If she yelled, it's like, oh, I don't want to go there. And get in that conflict and have her pissed off at me. Like, my whole life revolved around trying to please her and trying to make things right so that we had a good connection. And there was always this subconscious programming or thinking in my mind. There were so many more ways I always wanted to connect with my kids when we were married. And I think I did connect with them in a lot of ways, but man, I didn't see how this cowardice side was probably really damaging Maggie, and maybe the other kids in other ways. There's so many things you just don't see. And there was always this thinking in my mind that it was never right. There's the intermittent reinforcement with a narcissist. They throw you a bone here and there make you feel like everything's perfect and you're doing so good and they're so happy, and then take it away the next second, and then you're like, wait, what just happened? And trying to get that back. So then you're performing, you're doing everything the way they would want, trying to get back to that place of perfect harmony with them. And in my mind, I was always subconscious, I'm always thinking, I want to connect with my kids so much more than I even do. And I thought I was doing pretty good, but that relationship with their mom was always in the way. And I always felt like when I can get everything right with her, then everything will be good. If I could just do better, if I can just get that connection right and fix this, then I'll have so much more energy and time and whatever it takes to connect with my kids. That was never going to happen. I can see clearly now that was never going to happen. And I don't know what qualifies as an expert, and I'm not giving legal or personal advice. I'm not a counselor, but man, if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, I've seen so many people holding on because they think that marriage is the end all of everything, the most important thing in the world, and I don't anymore. I really believe that a lot of damage is done to kids staying in dynamics like that it's just so damaging, and it's perpetuating the cycle of generational trauma. Anyway, as all of this came to light, I also came to Maggie, and when I realized how all of that went, I think this is very important to be authentic. This helped the healing as well. I came to Maggie and I talked to her about it, and I said, Mags, I've realized something that has happened a lot in your life, and it really hurt her. I said, I'm really sorry that I feel that I was a coward in these situations. And she opened up and she told me stories about things that had happened, but nobody knew, between her and her mom, and things that she knew not to say anything because nobody would understand. And I mean, there's one day I vaguely remember it. I probably chose not to want to think about it, but Maggie I think I was at work. I was gone most of the day, but I came home and Maggie's in her room. I wanted to connect with my kids, and her mom says, she's in her room. She cannot come out. She was terrible today. And Maggie went to bed, and hearing Maggie's side of the story, like, she doesn't even remember what she did wrong, but she did not feel like the punishment fit the crime. It was unfair, and she didn't get to eat that day. There was so much. It was abusive. I hate to say it any other way. It was abusive, and I didn't step in and protect her. And all I can do now, our kids need to hear us be authentic and say that we're sorry when we realize we do wrong. Spent a lot of time in my life building an ego image of myself, what I could accept, an image of myself that I could look in the mirror and accept. But when all of this came up and I looked in the mirror and realized that I had been a coward, and that in me being a coward, it hurt my kid. Gosh, that was hard to accept, and it was hard to think about the hurt that she went through over that. So I hope this is encouraging to some people if they're in situations. I don't know who this will hit, but thank you for listening. I'm going to end this one here. There's so many more things to talk about. I'm going to hopefully bring my sister on at one point. She was the narcissistic, or she was the scapegoat child of the narcissistic dynamic with my dad. And I can look back now and see how I played into that as the older brother. And like, I've cried over it, thinking of the way that I felt. And I didn't know better, but the ways that I felt toward her and the ways that I didn't want to associate because of shame that was attached in my mind because of this scapegoat dynamic. It's really sad. My sister's a warrior. And so I hope to bring her on at one point and kind of let her paint a picture. And I've got some ideas. I'm going to keep bringing content. Man, I hope you keep listening. I thank you so much for listening. It's an honor to, if it touches anybody, it's really an honor. And I feel like this is my purpose. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.